Before you begin, Mr. Glasgow, I want to say that the restriction order that I made this morning until 6 p.m. will continue indefinitely until further order, but I expect to hear from the MOD by 6 p.m. with any application. All right? Thank you. Mr. Glasgow.
This is Mr. Nicol, having dealt with the two articles that you had written, can I take you in your statement, please, to page 5 and to paragraph 14? And that deals with the first of the two articles that we read together a moment ago. Insofar as the source of the article is capable of being identified, and by that I don't mean by name, but identified as a particular individual, was there one person or more than one person who provided you with the information that led to the first article in 2017?
There's a primary source who's referred to in the statement as the source. And then there is an individual referred to in my witness statement as the intermediary. The intermediary also had a significant amount of knowledge about the matters in question, but was not personally involved in them.
If we're then drawing a distinction between involvement, be it personal or otherwise, by that do we understand that the source was personally involved in the matters in question?
Correct.
Or at least that was your understanding of what he said to you?
Yes, I think that's borne out by the transcript that we'll be coming to.
Can I deal first, if I may, with the intermediary for a moment? As far as he is concerned, are you able to say for how long you have had that intermediary as a contact who's been able to assist you in this sort of investigative journalism?
Yeah, without being too specific, around a decade.
And is the intermediary an ex-member of UK Special Forces?
Yes.
And insofar as you were able to and have done due diligence as to his background and status, did you satisfy yourself as best as you could that he was who he claims to be?
Yes, by the time that we were discussing the matters in question, I knew him well.
I'm not asking for the detail of any other information that has provided to you, but can I ask you this at least? Outside of the two articles which I've been asking you questions about, has the intermediary been a source of other information which has led to other articles?
Yes, before and since.
In terms of the source, so drawing a distinction between the two individuals, the intermediary who you've had for about a decade, insofar as the source is concerned, when did you first speak to or meet that individual?
2016, so the year before we discussed the matters in question.
And when you came to meet him, was it with a view to obtaining information from him about the activities of UK Special Forces, or was it related to an entirely different matter?
It was not related to matters pertaining to UK Special Forces in Afghanistan, no.
When you met him in 2016, did he tell you what he had done for a job when he had been in the military?
Yes, yeah.
As to confirming his position, did he then confirm that he had been in UK Special Forces?
Yeah, yes, and it was confirmed by others at the same time as well.
Just dealing with the information he gave you for a moment, if I may, please, Mr. Nicol. Did he confirm to you that he had been in the SAS?
Yes.
Prior to meeting him, had you been able to conduct any inquiries into him to check whether he was who he claimed to be?
Not prior to the meeting in 2016, no.
Subsequent to meeting him and the claims he made about his former employment and his position within the SAS, did you conduct checks with other contacts of yours to try to verify what he had told you?
Yes. Going back to then, I recall that the intermediary and I would have had a series of discussions over the subsequent year, in which at the end of which I was satisfied that the source was who he said he was, and he had served at the times that he had done.
In addition to receiving information from the intermediary about the source in order to verify his claims, did you seek information from anyone else to try to back up your belief?
I identified other information from other sources, yes.
And did you receive information from any other source that suggested the claims that the source made about his former employment might be untrue or inaccurate?
No.
So do you have any reason to believe, either at the time of the article or as at today, to doubt your belief that the source had been employed within the SAS?
No, definitely not.
And insofar as the time during which he was a member of the SAS, do you have any reason to doubt the time frame that you believe he was a serving member of that regiment?
None.
Other than that meeting back in 2016, have you met the source on any subsequent occasions face to face?
No.
In terms of communication between you and the source, has that been via the telephone or via email or any other means?
Since when? Since 2017?
Since 2016 when you first met?
Yes, there was communication, electronic communication between him and I between 2016 and 2017. Not about the matters in question today, but about the other matters which we originally met in order to discuss.
Insofar as you've been able to interrogate any personal or company computer systems, have you found any phone calls or emails or any form of messaging exchange between you and the source?
They fall outside the, as per my witness statement, they fall outside the bracket of time that has been subjected to a forensic examination of emails, but yes, there were emails.
Insofar as the particular bracket of time that's devoted to the writing of the first article, were you able to identify any electronic communication between you and the source outside of the transcript of the call we're going to turn to in a moment?
No.
And for the avoidance of doubt, I think one of the matters that you've addressed in your statement is that prior to 2020, you've discovered, for reasons you don't understand, you've not been able to locate any WhatsApp messages on your personal phone.
That's correct, yeah.
In terms of making contact with the source, would one of the methods be via WhatsApp?
Yeah, that would be the primary method of communication.
And in terms of communicating with the intermediary, who also played a part in these stories, would you communicate with him via WhatsApp?
Yes.
Now, what I'd like to do, please, is to deal with the genesis of the article that you wrote and then turn to deal with, in particular, the information you received from the source. Can I take you back to your statement for a moment in case it helps? And can I invite you to look on page 6 to paragraph 17? On the evening of Saturday, the 1st of July of 2017, did the Mail on Sunday's news desk bring to your attention 2 tweets from journalists at the Sunday Times who were promoting a story entitled "Rogue SAS Unit Accused of Executing Civilians"?
Yes, that article was brought to my attention.
And was it your understanding at the time the tweets were, you were told about the tweets, that it would be the article to be brought out the following day, so Sunday the 2nd of July?
Correct.
And did you, in due course, read that article?
Yes.
Given that this was an article that touched upon an area that you had been involved in reporting on for some time, did you want to see if it was possible to verify via your sources the story that had been written by the journalists for the Sunday Times?
Very much so, but not necessarily to verify, but to approach it in an open-minded way in order to determine whether or not it was correct, but not necessarily to verify.
So if it might be the fact that it turned out that the story couldn't stand up, that would have been something you would have written about?
Yes, or certainly not made the same mistake.
And again, it may be difficult to remember precisely what you did that weekend in early July, but in terms of trying to find out information, did you then set about making contact with a number of different sources to see if they could help?
Very much so, because an article of this nature, as you can imagine, would have a lot of people would have paid attention to it, and perhaps would have been, if there was veracity to it, then there would have been concerns. So yes, it was easy to get in touch with people and have you seen X, Y, Z.
So in terms of have you seen X, Y, and Z, are those contacts that you had in the week after the article had been released? So we're thinking Monday the 3rd onwards.
Yes, but they're obviously long-standing contacts of mine. But yeah.
Amongst those people that you had contact with, did you make contact with the intermediary who you told us had been a long-standing source of more than a decade, who you were confident was an ex-member of UK Special Forces?
I did.
And insofar as he was able to help with the request you wanted about any information relating to the article, could he help you?
Yes, he was able to.
And what was the information that he was able to provide you with? And if it helps, you'll find that on the bottom of page 6 and the top of page 7, your paragraph 19.
Yes, I think it's fair to say he was already familiar with the matters in question before he was approached by me, and again, I am surmising and going back 7 years, but I think he would have given me an early assurance that this was indeed worth looking into.
In terms of whether he had personal information to give, was he able to offer any personal information?
Yes.
And at that stage, what was the personal information he was able to provide you that was relevant to the article that you discussed with him?
He had, and it wouldn't be for me to speculate as to from whom he obtained it, but he had an in-depth knowledge of some of the incidents in question. So my piece comes out 7 days later. As my witness statement makes clear, I don't speak to the source until midday on the Saturday or around there. So the first 4 days of that working, Sunday newspapers tend to work Tuesday to Saturday. First 4 days of that week, I'm really focusing on my work with the intermediary. And I'm thinking that in worst case scenario, would I be able to have enough information based on what he's told me to write an article or to be able to present an article to my editors for consideration?
Prior to speaking to the source then, and thinking if you can just on the information you had available from the intermediary, at that stage, did you think you did have sufficient information to write an article that you could present to your editors?
Yes, but nothing like as detailed or as graphic as it transpired.
In terms of a decision taken by you to reach out to the source, did you do that because you chose to do it, or was that something that you were recommended to do by the intermediary?
That's a tricky one. That's going quite far back or deep into my memory, as to whether it was he who volunteered or whether I suggested to him. It might have been. It could have been either, to be honest.
Can I check, just so that I've not misunderstood something? You set out at the bottom of page 6. Although I do not have a clear memory of the conversations I refer to below, which of course you've just told us,
Yeah.
I believe that the intermediary told me that he had some information from the source which he could pass on to me, and that the source may be happy to talk directly to me about his time in Afghanistan and the raids he was involved in.
That's correct, yes.
So at some point during the course of your discussions with the intermediary, he informed you that there was information that he had that he'd obtained from the source.
Yes.
And, even more important, the source might be willing to speak to you.
Correct.
Given that you had met the source in 2016, did you then get directly in contact with the source, or did you choose another route to try and reach him?
No, it was a tactic that obviously I'd only met this individual once, and it was in a group setting although it was for a number of hours. It was in a group setting. I felt that I didn't have a sufficiently in-depth relationship with him that would facilitate an approach on such a delicate matter as this. So I chose, although it seems going around the house's way of doing it, I chose to allow the intermediary to make the approach on my behalf and to sort of, for them to establish the terms under which it could take place.
Was there any hope or expectation on your part that if you allowed the intermediary to go first, that he might be able to persuade the source of your bona fides, and therefore the source might be more willing to speak to you about this?
Yes. I mean, the source did not know me well enough to trust me with his anonymity and things like that.
In terms of subsequent discussions that you had with the intermediary, can I just check, please? You record in your paragraph 21 that you had hoped to meet with the intermediary on the 6th of July, but that was not possible, and that you spoke briefly on the telephone on a number of occasions on Thursday the 6th and Friday the 7th, before meeting up with him in person on the evening of Friday the 7th of July.
That's correct.
At that stage, when you met with the intermediary, was he able to provide you with any information that he had received from the source?
Yes.
In general terms, can you tell us what that information was, please, Mr. Nicol?
Yes, in general terms, it was. He was describing the types of scenarios in which these extrajudicial killings had taken place, and trying to explain to me why they'd taken place. The position that UKSF personnel had found themselves in, and the difficult working environment which had led to them taking some of the decisions that they took.
And again, to be clear that we understand each other, the intermediary at that stage was not recounting events that he had been involved in, but was providing you with the information that he had obtained from the source.
That's correct.
And was your understanding from what you were told that the source had been directly involved in these events?
Yes.
At that meeting on the evening of Friday the 7th of July, were you told whether or not the source would be willing to speak to you personally about what you wanted to discuss with him?
Yes, I was assured that it was still a distinct possibility. But I was running out of time. You're on a sort of egg timer with the Sunday newspaper, and if you get to Friday evening and you haven't got to the person you needed to get to, you begin to think it might not happen.
Insofar as you may or may not have made notes of that meeting with the intermediary, did you make notes following the meeting with him?
Well, following the meeting, I began to sort of, I remember I sent an email to the news desk with a rough outline of the article I thought I could write based on the conversations I'd had till that point.
At the meeting, did you take any notes?
No.
And did you record that meeting?
No, certainly not.
But the email that contained the rough draft of an article, was that written based on the information you had received from the intermediary in the course of that meeting in the pub?
Correct.
And can you give us some idea, is this a quick 5-10 minute conversation, or was this a lengthy discussion?
No, it was at length. As I've said in my witness statement, I believe it lasted around 90 minutes. I think that's accurate.
Following the end of your discussion on that evening of Friday the 7th of July, did you have any more contact with the intermediary before the writing of your article?
I couldn't tell you one for definite one way or the other. I may have, it would seem natural that having spoken to the source, that I may have told the intermediary that that individual had indeed been in contact and we've been able to discuss it.
In terms of the information that you had received from the intermediary at that stage, which was information that you might use to stand up the article that you provided to your editors, was the intermediary paid for the information he had provided to you?
Following the publication of the article, a payment was made to the intermediary for his general assistance.
Was there any discussion between you and the intermediary at that meeting as to whether or not he would or might be paid for his assistance?
No.
Had he previously been paid for any assistance he'd given you in writing articles?
Yes, we had a solid working relationship, and he was one of the easier people to deal with, and that he wasn't grabby, or you get some very demanding people coming at you with saying, I want X, Y, and Z before anything will happen. He's not one of those types.
Could you give us some idea of the sorts of sums that had been paid out to that intermediary during the course of your professional relationship with him?
Yes, 1 second. Yes, this was checked at with the accounts department, and so in paragraph 36, paying the intermediary for his help was not unusual. Over the years, I have paid him sums ranging from £100 to £2,000 on numerous occasions.
Can we then return to the chronology on Friday, the 7th of July? If I've understood it correctly, you've had your meeting with the intermediary. He has provided you with information that he has got from the source. And at that stage, having not spoken to the source, you are prepared to write an article using that information, and a draft was submitted to your editors for that very purpose.
No, the draft was submitted, so particularly given the timescales and the fact it's Friday night, if you're going to get space in Sunday's newspaper, you've got to give the editors an idea of what it is you're going to be delivering. But by no means, once I submitted that draft, was that it was going to go in the paper. We may or may not have decided it to pull it, or we might have thought that it was better holding on for another 7 days.
So in a sense, did it all hang on whether you could speak to the source before it needed to go into the paper?
Pretty much. I mean, you wouldn't have a rival newspaper producing such an excellent piece 7 days previously. You wouldn't want to not mark the first week after with something. I think I could have produced a very, very straight piece and a much shorter, denser piece. But ideally, I wanted to speak to someone who'd been personally involved. Yeah.
And did in fact that come to pass the following day, Saturday, the 8th of July, when the source unexpectedly rang you on your mobile phone?
That's correct, yeah.
Were you expecting to receive any contact from him on that Saturday?
I remained optimistic. I wouldn't say I was expecting.
In terms of when it was that he made contact with you, please, are you able to give us a rough idea of the time that he called?
Yes, I mean, I think, the paper thinks from the examination of my phone records, that it was in the early afternoon, but because he'd called me and I'd not called him, it doesn't come up on any of the records that we've been able to obtain.
So in terms of trying to identify a time, have you looked for gaps in your phone billing when you aren't making any outgoing calls to try and identify when you might have received an incoming call?
Yeah, that's one factor, but my memory of that day is pretty good because of it was just quite a striking conversation. You don't forget it. I remember where I was when the phone rang.
You've set out in your statement that the time the phone rang, you were driving your car.
Yes.
And obviously this was an important call that you wanted to take. So rather than put the phone down and ring back, was there then a moment where you had to find somewhere to park the car so you could then get into having a proper conversation with this individual?
Yes, there was about a 10-minute frantic search for somewhere to park.
Whilst you were searching for somewhere to park, was at that stage the source giving you any information that was relevant to the article you wanted to write?
Yes, but I was keeping the conversation on very general terms because I was unable to make any record of it or focus enough on the task in hand.
Once you parked the car, how were you able to make a record of the conversation that you were then to embark on?
I taped it. I had my tape recorder was ready for when I had the opportunity to plug it in.
Did you tell the source that you were going to record this conversation?
No.
Did he ask you whether you were recording the conversation?
No.
At any point, did you make it clear to the source that you wanted to speak to him with a view to writing an article in your newspaper?
Yes, he already had that understanding on board.
And from what you could tell when he spoke to you, was he willing to discuss matters with you with a view to you writing in your newspaper about them?
With a strict caveat of anonymity, yes.
And that caveat of anonymity, did that also apply to the discussions you'd had with the intermediary?
In terms of protecting the identity of the intermediary?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
So did you treat both the intermediary and the source as confidential sources who were providing information to you, and therefore their identity would be kept secret?
Very much so, yeah.
The recording, which we're going to turn to in a moment, were you able to recover that from your digital tape recorder?
Yes, I would have listened to it a number of times on that Saturday afternoon in preparation for the piece that I filed. And then at the request of the inquiry, I subsequently located it 7 years later.
Having found it 7 years later and listened to it, did you then prepare the transcript that we're going to look at together in a moment?
I did.
And has that transcript, together with the recording, been provided to a solicitor, indeed a partner of a law firm, for that individual to check the accuracy of the transcript that you had prepared?
Yes.
So in effect, your homework's been marked by someone else?
Yes. It was a clear line.
When we come to look at the transcript, are there passages within the transcript where you have removed some of the words that were said to you by the source?
Yes, there are several. In some cases, it'll be a single word, such as a name. In others, it will be, and I've had to err on the side of caution, anything that I think is even vaguely biographical in terms of locations, things like that. I've had to be careful.
So the steps that you've taken, were they taken to protect the identity of your source,
Very much so.
who to you is confidential?
Correct.
When it comes to the removing of any passages, if there are any which you need to explain, when we reach them, will you do so, please, Mr. Nicol?
By all means.
Because what we'll see when we look at the transcript is there are a number of entries which appear in square brackets with the word redacted.
Yes, and they won't make sense without the context that I can provide.
And it may be when we come to look at the transcript that I'll need to ask your help with explaining your understanding of what it was that you were told.
Yes.
And also you very helpfully included some footnotes for the reader so that you've been able to translate some of the language that appears.
Correct.
And what I'd like to do then, please, Mr. Nicol, is to invite you to turn in the black file behind divider number 1. Your exhibit MN1 should appear there. And again, what we need to remind ourselves is this, that as and when the tape starts, you have at this stage had possibly as much as a 10-minute conversation with the source.
Yeah.
You've told us that you tried to keep matters as general as possible because you were trying to concentrate on driving your car, and presumably you didn't want to miss out on anything significant.
No, it would have been very awkward if that had occurred.
Now, what we're going to do is to read the transcript together into the record, and as we do so, there'll be moments when I'm going to stop and ask you to explain a few matters,
Yeah.
but I'll try to avoid interrupting as little as I can. Well, would it be sensible if I were to read those entries from the source, and if Mr. Nicol were to read those entries for himself, and as and when I need to, or indeed when you need to, sir, what can happen is I can stop and Mr. Nicol can be asked questions for clarification or to explain points.
Indeed, Mr. Glasgow, I'm conscious of the burden on the shorthand writers. I've asked for the entire transcript to be read into the record. It may be that the transcript writers will be able to have a hard copy in due course to use.
They've already been provided with a copy of it. The inquiry team have been ahead of you on that.
Good.
So I hope that what will be possible for those who are taking a note to do is to simply identify and take a note of those questions that I ask over and above the transcript, and that can be worked into the body of the document rather than having to do a complete note of not only the question and answer session from the recording, also any additional questions asked on top.
Good, thank you.
So, Mr. Nicol, we can see that the recording that you have transcribed begins on what is marked as MN20 on our pagination in red at the bottom of the page. Shot down, not enough evidence and stuff like that. My take, it's the same as Northern Ireland now. Look at what they're trying to do now. I don't know why they're doing it. I don't know if someone has been bitter from my side and thought, right, I'm going to say this, or someone. There's that many people on that camp, now we can't control it. People think they know what's going on, but they don't, mate, they don't. Any of the blokes involved, sorry, go on, Mark.
You would like me to read, sorry.
If you wouldn't mind, please.
Yes, and just to give you some context there, we're talking, obviously what the point of the conversation between him and I at that point is who it might have been who has alerted the Sunday Times to the matters in question. You'd be stunned, wouldn't you, if one of your colleagues decided to dob everyone in? I mean, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I would, mate. But it's look at the old boss writing that book and stuff like that. We can't say nothing's happening. It doesn't take much for disgruntled. Me personally, yes, I've got some bits I'm pissed off with the regiment, how they treated us and stuff like that. But I take the stuff, I do. That was my job, and I protect that with everything I've got. So.
Yeah. Towards the end of your time, the RMP thing was stepping up a bit, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, mate. Yeah, it was. Lots. But still, as far as I'm aware from the lads there, there were still ongoing investigations from our tour. But.
Yes, well, my reading of that Sunday Times thing, the period of time that they were really looking at closely was 2010 to 2013, which, as you say, was...
Shocking. That was my tour. And then there is laughter. Is that laughter from the source, from you, or from both?
Both.
Right, were before us, mate, and their rate on the old bad guys was, I think it was about 400 to 500 KIA. And can I pause there? We can see straight away in this entry at the top of our page 21 that there are two entries which appear in square brackets with the word redacted. Are you able to help now with whether that's biographical information or names or locations and that's why it's been removed, or is it something less specific than that?
This is as far as I'd like to go. This is unit, or sub-unit.
Okay. So your reply is then to the, I think it was about 400 to 500 KIA.
Yeah. Oh, what? By the regiment? Just the regiment, or?
Yes, mate. My squadron in the time, we hit 300 odd, and that was KIA, never mind the ones that we arrested and actually got back. So we had, myself, personally, I don't keep camps, mate. It was my big experience in the regiment, and yeah, I was like a fucking kid in a sweet shop, to be honest. It was just so busy. Never experienced anything like that in my life, ever. Our opening brief.
It was effective, wasn't it? Yeah.
Mate, we broke them. We broke squadrons. Look at the squadrons. You got Sabre squadrons coming in, back-to-back, 6-month tours, whacking them every day, non-stop. And the whole of Helmand was clear. We cleared it. And now look at the state of it. They got power in there again. So, from our perspective, we were doing these jobs, yes. We took the Afghans with us for the Afghan face, as you mentioned it. But that was before the NDS was established properly. That's who they were. They were like the police side. It was more for the evidential side, but I don't know. Afghans don't work on, fingerprinting and all that stuff. It's all well and good us doing that. That's our own capabilities. But they work on picture body weapons or body drugs, or that's how their brains work. So that's what they were there for. We tried to get them involved, but trying to teach them what they should be doing, helping these people, it was a tribal thing. I caught many a time when we did take some back to a torchlight, the older investigation side, I've caught the NDS talking to them saying, don't worry, they'll have you there for 3 days, then you'll be released. My terp was really good, so he used to tell me this, and we were just pissing in the wind, so it just annoyed us. So sometimes the ones who we knew were really bad, was like Northern Ireland, mate. They're just, if they're not armed there and then, it's just a little bit of grey area. But we managed. Obviously, we get smart. We know how to deal with these people, and that's what we did. And that's what I don't think we've done wrong. I think it was needed for the people we were dealing with, and that's how we folded the Taliban. We nearly got rid of God knows how many cells out there. They couldn't operate anymore. Now look at it. They've got freedom of movement. They own half of Afghanistan, which we're not advertising. They've got more provinces held by the Taliban than the government are holding. And can I pause you there for a moment before you read your reply? The passage that I've just read out that starts on the very bottom of page 21, if they're not armed there and then, it's a little bit of a grey area, but we managed, obviously we get smart, we know how to deal with these people, and that's what we did. Did you have any idea what the source was referring to when he spoke those words to you?
Certainly not as much as I would do now. I mean, that you can imagine back in 2017, much less was known about the matters in question than are known today. And it was a 40-minute learning process. It was a fast learning process. And I can explain that in more detail. I didn't think at that point that might be a reference directed to judicial killings. I think that probably comes later. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but there were rules of engagement in Afghanistan which were put in place, which entitled British personnel to eliminate people who were not carrying arms.
I'm not going to ask you about rules of engagement myself, for this reason that we've already had evidence from specialists in that particular area,
Okay.
And we're going to hear from other individuals who can assist us. And what I'd like to do is to confine myself to asking questions about your discussions with the source and how that led to the articles that you've written.
Mm-hmm.
So at that stage in this conversation, have I understood that you weren't clear what it was that the source was saying to you?
No, I'm just letting him talk, and I'm learning with everything that he says. And obviously, this is the start of a very long conversation. So by the end of it, I know a lot more than I did at this point.
When you came back to listen to that conversation again, armed with everything that you come to learn in that 40-minute call, were you able better to understand what it was that he said at the bottom of our page 21, top of page 22?
Yes.
And what, armed with all that you had then learned from the source, how did you then interpret his words?
That individuals were not armed when they were killed, and that the getting smart referred to policies or tactics such as drop weapon and others.
And by drop weapon, are you referring to weapons being placed on individuals after they had been killed to give an appearance that they had been in possession of that weapon at the time they were shot?
Correct, as we'll come on to, I'm sure.
In which case, having rudely interrupted you, can I ask you to continue with your response to the passage we've just looked at?
Yeah. And without any sort of, I'm going back to when you were there, any kind of functioning judicial process, inevitably you're going to find your own solution to problems.
Yeah.
You're going to reach a conclusion, well, what would I rather do? Would I rather capture them, have them go through the system and get spat out again?
Yeah.
Or do we deal with it in a raid situation? And,
Well, I'll give you one little story, just so you can understand how we, on the same tour, I forget the FOB it was, they were getting absolutely hammered with these IED belts every day. But the poor lads wouldn't leave that compound. They can't do it. Their rules of engagement does not suit that type of environment. It's city, Northern Ireland rules of engagement. It doesn't work over there. So obviously we asked, and I think that if we could do something about it, this. So we watched this bloke for a couple of days, saw what he was doing, got him, and then we went and hit him on the night. And funny old thing, once he'd gone, the IEDs stopped. So that's how effective us going out and sorting one individual it can have on a whole battle group, never mind he was the main planner. Yes, we went in there. Obviously, he's not a stupid man, because they're clever men. They know that if they have weapons, because it's illegal to have weapons in Afghanistan anyway by law, their own law, they hide them, mate. They stockpile them. I've seen them. I've watched the footage before we get on these targets. I know where they hide them. It's just unfortunately that in the heat of the moment, when we're doing our job, we have to, how shall I say, we have to prove to the Afghans there and then that that was the only way we could deal with it. And then we sort out the bits, if you know what I mean. And can I pause there? At that stage in the conversation, did you know what he meant?
By?
At that point, but by the phrase, we have to prove to the Afghans there and then that was the only way we could deal with it. And then we sort out the bits.
Yeah, a picture is beginning to form.
By the end of the conversation, some 40 minutes later, and when you replayed this conversation to yourself, what conclusion did you reach as to the only way that they could deal with things meant?
Well, there was only one conclusion, and it's rather, well, we may come to it. It's rather summed up by the last two words on the tape. As the conversation transpires, it appears clearer and clearer that there was a tactic developed in order to get around the obstacles that were in their way.
Can we continue then with your reply?
And do they accept that?
They do. Some of them are a bit funny with us. They're not stupid. The Afghans are not stupid people. They knew what was going on, but they couldn't prove what was happening. All they know was we showed them the weapons, what they had. They took the serial numbers, and then that was happy enough for them. As much as it pissed them off. Mate, little comments like this. Can we stop shooting them? Do we have to kill them? Can't we just shoot them in the hand so they drop the weapons? It was like that. I'll tell you what, you can go first.
Yeah.
So we let one of them go one night because I knew the area we're going into was quite feisty. So I said to the TL, is that team leader?
It is.
So I said to the TL, let's let these go in here because this is going to be a two-way range. They let in, mate, and they lost a bloke that night. That calmed them down, and they went back to the rear where they'd been, and they let us do our job then when they realised. So, yeah, as much as it sounds quite gruesome, but it's the way we dealt with them.
No, indeed. I mean...
And the ones that we did arrest, mate, and took to Torchlight, yes, the way the Brits work and the Americans work is two different beasts, but they were in there for 3 or 4 days. Yes, we might have got a bit off them, but then they were walking out the camp gates, so within the week they were doing the same shit again. We followed this bloke. He was released. He was a major player. Torchlight, or Varsity, whatever we called it then, wouldn't play. Couldn't get sod all from him because they just sit and give him cups of tea. So we've waited. We've tracked him. We followed him on the Predator, watched what he was doing, and we got it all cleared. Then we just dropped a bomb on him instead. So we got him eventually, but it was a bit more costly than what we should do that night.
You know, the reality of it is you don't have to be carrying weapons to be a threat. Because if you're orchestrating or if you're dicking, whatever...
And by dicking, do you mean to refer to someone who's acting as a lookout?
That's correct.
Yeah. If they've got a phone and they're giving out orders, in my mind, and I'm not on about the little blokes who were doing the shooting. I'm on about the blokes who've got military knowledge and know how to plan an action. And that's what we want. So one night, even the other, the Diet Coke side to us up in Poole, they were doing the drug side, we were doing the hard-hitting side. They swooped on a target after we went on it the night before, and they saw what we'd done and what the bodies were like, and they were like, fucking hell, what did you do? And there were 3 coppers, 3 policemen, Afghan police, all ready to go. The suicide vests were there. They were going to go and do an attack on one of the bases as coppers. We found them, we hit them, we sorted them out properly. So stuff like that is when you see it, and I was in that.
What was the method of eliminating them? Was it a gunfight, as it were?
Yeah, straight in. Because our biggest thing was we were going out night ops. So that's why the Afghans used to call us devils, because we go in at night. We used to walk past Taliban patrols in trenches. They'd not seen us. Then they wake up in the morning and there'd be 5 dead commanders. And then, no, nothing. We were in and out without them knowing that's where it came from. We were very effective. We do a lot of walk-ins, like 12K walk-ins, helos well out of sight, so they can hear the helos from 10Ks away. So we drop at 12K and walk in past them, and that's what we do. I've been personally, this is in a room with these fuckers asleep, and they don't even know we're there. So, but they're big commanders. They hide behind kids. They fucking hold out their kids because they know they're not stupid. When we do a call out, we call it a call out. So we go noisy. We give them the opportunity to come out, let them play their cards. We get the women and kids out, so it's not gung-ho. We get the women and kids out. These fuckers will hide, dressed as women. Or one of them, he had his child in front of him, because they know exactly what's going to happen to them. They know that they're not going to last the night. So they try it. So me personally, and this was why I didn't have issues when I was leaving, but I did have to go and speak to some people because it does play on your mind a little bit. Did I do everything right or wrong? But it was my job, so I took him back in. He was a major commander. I got it. I thought I'd fucked up because my TL was like, take him back in and do a search. I sort of read between the lines there, done what I've needed to do, and he was like, yeah, fucking pull the pistol out on the search. So that was my thing behind. And then we went to the bar afterwards. I went very quietly. I was like that. Have I fucked up here by doing what I did? But he went, no, I'll never give you anyone to take anywhere unless it's for a reason. So we know exactly who they are. The intelligence and the way we're working, we're not going out cold-footed and just looking for people. We're hunting these men individually, hunting them. And again, can I pause there, please? In the passage that I've just read to you, the source has described to you taking someone back in to do a search, having been directed to do that, and then the source told you that he'd read between the lines and done what he needed to do. What did you come to understand the source to mean when he told you that he'd been tasked to take someone back in and do a search, and then he had done what he needed to do?
If I'm perfectly honest, at that moment in time, I was probably quite taken aback and almost confused because, and it's only later when you have this is the benefit of taping it, is there's no dispute over what was said. And when you look at it now, when you look at it even a day later or 7 years later, it's pretty clear what he's referring to there, what happened. But at the time, I was quite taken aback.
Well, again, to avoid any misunderstanding between anyone who is reading that transcript or listening to it, whilst it may be pretty clear, can I ask you, please, Mr. Nicol, this? What was your understanding and what is your understanding of what the source meant when he uttered those words to you?
The bit about taking back in the Major Commander?
Yes.
That he'd executed him.
And from what he told you, he was directed to do that by his team leader.
Correct.
That he had read between the lines, in other words, interpreted what he'd been told to do.
Correct. And then particularly because he then seeks reassurance afterwards as to whether he did the right thing.
When he uttered the words, pulled a pistol out on the search, what did you understand that to refer to, please?
Well, again, I must stress at the time, slightly confused because it's only later that you understand that was the often used MO for doing this, that's what they'd say had happened in order to justify killing the individual.
So to be clear about what you've just told us, your belief of what the source admitted to you was that he had been directed by his team leader to take the Major Commander back inside in order that he could be shot.
Correct.
That your source had understood the direction he'd been given as meaning precisely that.
Correct.
That he had carried out that direction, and that the excuse that the Major Commander had pulled out a pistol during the search was what was to be used to justify the action of shooting him dead.
Yes.
And that subsequent to that operation, your source had spoken to his team leader to clarify whether he had done the right thing, and that the team leader had agreed that the actions of your source were what he had wanted to happen.
Correct.
Hence the words, I'll never give you anyone to take anywhere unless it's for a reason.
Correct.
Again, can I ask you please to return to the transcript and read on your reply to those observations?
Yeah. I mean, and just to give you, I mean, I am in a really quite surprised by what I've just heard when I say what I've said here. I mean, I wouldn't, even though obviously everything is completely anonymized, I wouldn't mention or allude to what you're alluding to there.
And is that a reference from you to the source, to the fact that his admission to you is not something that you're going to allude to in the article you're planning to write?
Yes. Everyone will notice that from the article being read out earlier, that it doesn't include this passage here about the individual describing very, very graphic circumstances in which he did exactly what I've reported to in general terms in the piece.
So were you seeking to reassure him that that particular admission or confession, however it might be described, were you seeking to reassure him that that was not going to feature in your newspaper?
Correct, yeah.
If you had wanted to include that within your article, would you have discussed that course of action with the source before writing the article?
Definitely, yeah.
And if your source had said to you, no, Mark, I don't want you to put that in the newspaper, would you have published an article nonetheless that included this confession, or would you have acceded to that request and not written about it?
I would have acceded to that request, which is indeed what happened.
And when someone, at least on your interpretation, is making an admission of such severity to you, why would you accede to a request from them not to reveal it to the general public?
Well, again, remember at the time, I'm hearing it for the first time. I've got a few hours to go after this before I have to finish my piece. It's still open to a degree of interpretation, what happened and the specific circumstances. I think it would have been cavalier to have done as you suggest I might have done.
In terms of a different interpretation that might be put on this passage, can I just ask you to assist with what other interpretation you might put upon the passage, please, Mr. Nicol?
Well, with the benefit of hindsight and 7 years of everybody looking into these incidents, I don't see any other conclusion. But I'm having to think very fast in order to maintain a conversation that's become incredibly interesting but incredibly delicate.
Having given him that reassurance, it would appear he recognises the reassurance because he replies, no. And then please read on, Mr. Nicol, if you wouldn't mind.
It does chime with what we spoke about before. It's a bit, that would be too easily misunderstood, and you'd have red caps knocking on your door.
By red caps, is that a reference in shorthand to the Royal Military Police?
It is.
And then continuing your passage over the plays page at the top of page 26.
But the interesting one is when you talked about where you crept into that room where the commanders were, you were able to take them out without the sort of Taliban perimeter defences knowing you got in.
Yeah, that was it. We were so obviously closed down. They've stopped the fighting season as much as they can. They go on R&R, so we bounce into where their homes are. We go to where their fathers, their children are, and we go to where they live. Little guest house where they're staying and making IDs. We go knocking on their doors. Mate, this target, one of them, went there, wasn't there, we couldn't find him. His brother, his uncle and all were there. So we obviously arrested his brother, done there, watched him. We sent SFSG back on the helos so they thought we were lifting off. So they could hear a lot of movement and a lot of blokes leaving. And the Sabre Squadron, we just sat there for about an hour, just sat in his compound. And funny old thing, he couldn't help himself. He had to come back and check on his family as he would. And as he walked, I think it must be as he walked in.
Yeah, sorry.
And as he walked in, we were just like that. All right, son. And we gripped him and we had him. But unfortunately, we had to arrest him because he was taken alive then. Took him to Torchlight. And this is one we ended up and this is the one we then ended up dropping or getting it cleared to drop on him. 3 or 4 days after he was released, literally outside the camp. Once he got into the desert, open area, we had enough evidence of what was going on to get it cleared from higher up to drop. So we did. And we got the predators on him. So a bit more expensive, but...
One of the weird aspects of that Sunday Times piece was the idea that guys would use the same weapon again and again as this drop weapon, as they called it.
Yeah. You're hitting spots, yeah.
Just by hitting spots, he means sensitive areas. The tone of his voice changes, it softens at that point. It's clearly a point of sensitivity for him. What would you think about that? I mean, is it a tactic or is it bullshit?
This is me talking to you, yeah?
Yeah, and that's him saying to me that this is just me and you talking. This is, yeah.
Well, we do have things with us, just to keep that for the Afghan side, okay? If it was just all expats and just us, but the fact that we're working with Afghan and they don't understand the targeting side and what these people do, we can show them satellite footage, all the phone speak we get and all that stuff, and it doesn't mean anything to them. They need to see a weapon in his hand, okay? So luckily we can find weapons caches, but we would always have something to keep our own selves safe when we know what we're dealing with. So yes, and there's a passage inaudible there. Are you able to help us with the general sense of what it is that's been removed? Is it a continuation of the conversation that he's just had with you, or is it other different particular detail?
No, we definitely stay on topic. I think it's just, I don't think there's anything of note that's been removed there. It's just probably a grunt or a cough or something like that.
So inaudible rather than redacted.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. Shall I continue?
Please do.
When you say safe, do you mean something to back you up legally?
Yes, it's an unspoken thing and never be talked about. Where I think this has only come from someone who has worked within ourselves or an attached rank, so the signals or 264, because as a bloke, we just look at each other. We don't have to talk about that shit. So this makes me feel it's more external than our own badge members, because we would never talk about stuff like that. Never.
Well, thankfully, I don't think RMP have been able to get very far with that, I don't think. But they've certainly looked at it as hard as they could. I think, the thing about putting the Afghan face on things, that would explain a lot. That would immediately, if you're reading a report, by, a squadron and it says, the Afghans did this, the Afghans did that, and then they got some video of the Predator footage and it suggests, well, actually, that was a UK hit. Well, clearly, that's pretty innocent, I think. That's about, as you said, putting the Afghan face on it. I can't see something sinister there.
Yeah, but what the RMPs have failed to say is, mate, we never went on the ground without an RMP. We had an RMP with us. Every operation we had an RMP there to do, whether it be female to do the female searches or a male to do the searching, the evidential side. My job, once we went clear and compound secure, I dug up all that stuff. So it was done properly, okay? But then there was times where, biggest Taliban commander since it started, he finally came over because we killed that many Taliban. He finally came over. This was what we were trying to do. We were trying to peak it, to try and get the big men in, and came out. We caught him that night. Unfortunately, it was one of the officers who was on Overwatch. If it was one of the blokes, maybe things would have been done differently. But the fact that we put someone, this is why we keep officers out of the way, because they don't want a frigging clear they want a frigging clear conscience. We're blokes, we know what we're doing, we've read the small print, and we had. So unfortunately we took him alive. But he was one of the biggest Taliban commanders. And can I pause there? The description that's just been given to you by the sources on this particular operation, that the Taliban commander that has been taken is someone who's been arrested on that particular operation.
That's correct, yeah.
Reference to keeping the officers out of the way because the officers, want a frigging clear conscience, and we're the blokes, we know what we're doing, we've read the small print. What was your understanding of that, please, Mr. Nicol? And it may be that it's obvious from those words.
Yeah, I think the officers will be slightly more hesitant about opening fire when they're uncertain as to the identity of the person they're firing at. If I can just raise up one little point, the two words compound secure are quite important at the bottom of page 27.
Yes.
It may have come up in other investigations that you've taken part in, but once they say it's compound secure, that means that all the Afghans in it are unarmed, so they don't pose a threat.
Can you just help us with Overwatch, what that means?
Yes, I think from recollection, that's to do with when they come in on a helicopter, there'll be someone who stays on the rope ladder that descends from the helicopter and is able to see those who come down before him engage those on the ground.
Thank you.
After he told you about one of the biggest Taliban commanders back in Afghanistan being taken, you asked, did he end up in prison or was he recycled quickly like the others? And if we continue from there, no, he definitely ended up in prison. But I think he was to the point where, you know, when the escapes, when they're doing the tunnelling out of the prisons, I think that in his time, that was in his time, mate, so he's probably back out there again.
He's probably a rich and well-connected man.
Well, they are, mate, but look at this. I've been... And then it continues with you.
Yeah, the redactions there are longer than most of the other redactions. I think they refer to more personal experiences which would inevitably reveal his identity. Going back to your 6-month tour, how many raids do you think you'd have gone on a 6-month tour?
Oh my God, mate, I've lost count. I could go on my hard drive because I didn't keep it for any weird reasons other than it was my hard drive and it was still on there. But every mission is on there. So I remember when we got our stats back, it was over 300 odd KIA. Jesus Christ, mate. One night I was, me, myself, and a TL. That was 4 or 5 blokes we were fighting against, just 2 of us. So in one night. So you can see how, but we went out every night for 6 months non-stop. Apart from when the weather came in, or Karzai, this was what I was alluding to with the government. We're stopping night operations. It's because we were absolutely hammering them. And they were bleeding that bad, they couldn't do any more damage in Helmand. They could not do another round there because they had no blokes. They'd lost the ground and momentum. They couldn't get the stores. They couldn't get the IEDs. Like, on targets, it was one set group. So each group had a set target. We'd hammered them this much. Anyone. So the SQMS or the Stormman who was supplying all the bits, every time someone got promoted to that job, we went out. We must have went out about 4 or 5 times on that short time alone for blokes who were getting promoted by the Taliban to do this job. 4 or 5 times before it folded, because every time someone took that job over, they knew they got killed.
Yeah.
So it folded them. So that's a whole massive group in Helmand just put to bed now because they cannot get the stores and the supplies. So that's the effect we were having on that ground. It was every night. I could probably count on maybe in 1 month. I'd say we've probably not gone on the ground maybe 2 or 3 nights due to bad weather or flight problems or no targeting. Unless we were 100% sure and we have had the eyes on them all day because we watched them for a good 24 hours, or if it's bigger, we've watched it for 3 days before we would even contemplate going on it. If you don't just go on it and think, let's see what happens. The only time we'd done that is when we had no jobs on and we'd tell the shakies to bugger off, and then we'd go out and do the drug busting because we were eager to get stuff done. It was every night, knackered, every night.
Can you remember roughly where that thing was, where the policemen were going into with the suicide belts? Were you able to foil that?
I can if I go back. I'll get my hard drive because I can get you the pictures of them.
No, that would be...
It's just you'll have to block out and do your little editing stuff on the horrible side. But there were 2 policemen. I got the one on the right, my TL got the one on the left, and the uniforms were hanging up right above them. Suicide vests, good to go. We even found a pile of their hair where obviously they prepped their bodies for sacrificing themselves. I'm sure that was...
And I don't want to be too specific with the date, you see, because I don't want anyone to be even remotely compromised. So
Yeah. It were 2 coppers. But when they went to get buried, because you know how quick they are to bury their dead, that's when the other lot from Poole swooped in the next day, because we were just doing random vehicle checks, and they had the 2 bodies in there, and that's when they were like, what the fuck did you two do? As in, what the fuck are you doing with that? Mate, when you do, this is how you shoot properly, because they weren't seeing as much of the sharp end as we were. When they start seeing the state of the bodies, actually what they really look like once they've been shot up, they're like, fucking hell.
So in that case, you're not going to tap them on the shoulder and try to arrest them. You're going to eliminate them?
No, we go in and remember our brief. When I get my orders that night, before I go on that helicopter, my orders are right. This is the target set. This is where we're going. And then the OC's opening brief is kill, capture. It's not the other way around. It's kill, capture. And that's what our orders are at Tier 1 level. It is kill, capture. We're not going out for bad boys. We're going out for the main players. Sorry, we're not going out for bat boys. We're going out for the main players. We're not on about pipe swingers. They're $100. You can pay a farmer $100 and they'll go and put an IED in the floor for you. So our orders, and that's how we worked, and there's nothing secret. Well, it's not a secret, I'd say. It is kill, capture. Their main words, kill, capture. It was never the other way around.
But, so the RMP would have been aware of that at the time?
Yes, because they're sat in the orders with us. We get a full ground brief. Everyone involved on that mission is sat in them orders. And then when we come back, we all have a hot debrief. What went on, lessons learned, did we do this? Yeah, what was that? And is there any issues? Yes, right. We need to tie this up. We need to do this a bit better. And that's how we work. So then police were never kept unless, and then if it was internal between the two, because we don't air our internal dirty washing, we do an overall debrief for everyone. And then it was like blades only, right? Fucking dick, fucking next time you put up a ladder, make sure the fucking ladder is ready to go and stop fucking being a twat. Make sure you got the right kit. Why did you fucking forget this? Why did the charge not work? That was the internal bits between us, okay? But overall, we have an opening orders brief before we go on the ground. Everyone involved in that, even the fucking helicopter pilots were there. RMPs were there.
But maybe RMPs get a bit miffed if they're left out of some of the messy business.
Yeah, well, I think they're just like that. But I had RMP interviews after some jobs I went on. One of them was because I was bringing him on. He was arrested. I was bringing him on and the fucking dog bit him. I didn't know the dog had bit him. And unfortunately, it's fucking at night and we're in a hot LT. There's incoming. It's not a nice place. The sky's lighting up and the dog bit his calf. So maybe he got slapped about. He thought he got slapped about. That's where we let the Afghans. We never questioned him. We would be in the background and we would tell the Afghans, right, ask him where such and such. Where was he? What's this? And then we let the Afghans do it the Afghan way. And they're hands-on. That's nothing to do with us. We're just there. They do it their way, and we're not daft. That's how we get around it. We let them do the questioning. We just ask the questions. They carry out the questioning. But yeah, that was it, mate. So for them to say, oh, this is all, they were in them fucking orders. They heard it was kill, capture. Exactly the same words as I do, because they would have to be placed. They need to know where they're going and who's going to be looking after them, because they'd be with one of the lads, so...
Yeah. Well, they're spending an awful lot of money on this investigation, apparently, like millions.
I know. I did well. It's obviously come out a bit more, but then a couple of months ago, because I saw it on the old internet news, and I thought it was quite funny because of the words. I thought that's fucking very close to home. Someone's proper, shouting out there a bit more than they need to. And I don't. The blokes would never do that.
No way.
I think it's either someone internal, like the fucking signals lads who are attached to us. We do have a lot of attached people with this, mate, unfortunately. That's the way we are at the minute. So can I pause there for a moment? When he starts talking about information that's very fucking close to home, but the blokes would never do that. In terms of the information that's close to home, did you understand that to mean information about what had been happening in Afghanistan?
Yes, the matters in question today.
And when he used the phrase to you, the blokes would never do that, what did you understand him to imply from that phrase?
That the blokes, that's the badged SAS members at NCO level and below, would never discuss outside themselves matters this delicate.
And when he said then, I think it's either someone internal like fucking signals, we do have a lot of attached people with this, mate, unfortunately. Is he drawing a distinction between those, as you've described them, as badged individuals and those who are simply attached to UKSF?
He is. I mean, many signals lads will be badged, as in they've passed SAS selection, but they won't be in the Sabre squadrons.
So is your understanding of what he said to you at that time that he is at least drawing a distinction between those people who he regards as people who wouldn't speak about what had happened and those who are, in some sense, one stage removed from the squadrons,
yes,
and they might be prepared to speak?
In its entirety, it is a closed community, but even within that closed community, there are higher walls. And I think the 4 Sabre squadrons are very tight compared to the others.
When you talk about it being a closed community and when they're being higher walls within that closed community. Some witnesses have described their belief that there was such a thing as possibly an omerta within UK Special Forces, some sort of code of silence. Is that your experience, having had discussions with not only this source but others who you believe were part of UKSF?
Yeah, I think from my lifetime of experience being close to the regiment and studying its operations, I think that holds true, yeah.
I mean, in some sense, there's a slight irony that you're dealing with people who are speaking to you about these events, but you're also telling us that there is a code of silence that operates within UKSF. It may be that it's difficult to explain that to us, but are you able to help us with how it is that you appear to have access to people who are able to divulge information to you, but at the same time, you're cognizant of walls within walls in this particular community?
I mean, I think I plainly got lucky in terms of being able to speak to this individual. I think once they've left the regiment and they don't have those close ties anymore, he comes on to that towards the end of the transcript, they can feel a little bit cut off. And having been through such intense experiences, to not have anyone in their everyday life to discuss these very intense experiences with, particularly if they've got bad memories. As odd as it may seem, as someone like me comes along with who is vouched for, with a degree of internal knowledge of what they're talking about, and with connections to the same community, I think it can be for them to share some of those recollections. But I don't think for a second this individual or any other would have considered doing that whilst he remained in service.
Sounds as if your gentle probing is perhaps a little better received than mine. Can we just continue with the transcript, please? You began, I just can't see there, Can we read from there, please?
Yeah, I just can't see there, we haven't, then, because it won't be tolerated, because eventually that sort of person gets other people into trouble. If I could just point out to you there's probably a word missing there. I'm trying to work out in my head very, very quickly what on earth's gone on and what this chap's telling me about. And I'm thinking, well, maybe there's someone who's flipped a bit. And I remember using the word Rambo, and the person who's confirmed this transcript has maybe not heard Rambo, but I was trying to allude to the fact that there might be some rogue in the unit who had gone way beyond their brief. Because eventually that sort of person gets other people into trouble.
And then the source continued, unless the only experience I've had with a rogue, I wouldn't say rogue, but bloke, was he was before my time. I forget his name. He started dating some girl who's like, everything is pink and fluffy and green, one of them type ones. And obviously turned him around, and he's on, he gives a lot of speeches now, anti-war speeches and stuff. He, talks about his time in Iraq and shit like that.
Oh, yeah, I know the guy. Oh, veterans. He runs Veterans for Peace. Ben something or other. Ben Griffin.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
So that's the only time I've really experienced that part. And then apart from obviously blokes who've been in trouble in the recent past, like having weapons and shit in their garage, maybe trying to, bat the shit off, unfortunately, I've been brought up old school. So if you fuck up, you take it. That's why I'm protected with the stuff I've done. And when I did have to go and speak to a doctor, because I got told to, I couldn't speak to him because I explained to him, mate, I've done stuff which is, you don't understand these levels. That's it, I went, yes, it bothers me because there was a couple of experiences I maybe could have done differently. But at that time, when I broke it all down, I couldn't have done it any different because that's what we were trained to do. And that was what the drill, unfortunately, fucking people hiding under blankets and then fucking doing that is when you've already been shot at for 2 hours. I'm practically a target. So that's my own little bit. But I said to him, I am protective of what we do, and I'll take that to my grave. That's my thing. And I hope that if something ever happened to me, or if I needed help from the regiment because of how I've acted, sort of protect stuff, they'd help me out. And that's what my...
But how close have the RMP got to you in the past?
What? When? On this? Well, we had face-to-face interviews straight after, like days after. But with us, I think, along the same lines as UKCT, we're not allowed to be interviewed for 24 hours after. So We were never investigated or physically started investigations about, did you shoot such and such? It was all nitty-gritty stuff like, or maybe slapping some bloke because he's made a complaint in Torchlight. That was all it was. If they were arrested, that's when the complaints came in. If they were never arrested, we never had a complaint. Yes, the families may have complained, but then you got the NGOs going through these villages. Oh, the Brits came here and killed 4 of our men. Yeah, but why? Because they're fucking Taliban commanders. You miss that bit out, don't you? But I remember, like, for example, so we go in, target, we blow a wall in, we do what we need to do, we lift who we need to lift, move on, build up more intel, pay the elderly, whoever the compound elder is, we pay him for blowing his wall up, so there's photos and then getting their money, because that was the government side showing that, okay? Even though we've done this is to help your family and food and stuff like that. Okay, so yeah, then the Afghans, if there was any deaths on target, then that's why we had the Afghans. They would do their evidential stuff, then they would prep them and hand them back over to the families. Well, when you've got families and they do not start crying and showing feelings, you fucking know you've got a big player there. And you knew he was playing on time, borrowed time. So you see it, you can feel it there. You've got a nice job, but this is why I alluded to Northern Ireland, mate, because you know they're clever. Terrorists are all clever. They know that things are watching them. They don't openly walk around with weapons, do they? Them days are long gone.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm talking about something I'll hopefully never experience, but of killing somebody. Does it get harder to deal with in time or easier?
Do you know what bothers me? It seems like, what, mate? I can remember the first. I got to the regiment a little bit older, mate. First night I went out, I was number 1. Went in, killed 3 blokes in my first night out. I was like, that. Didn't even think twice, but what I thought was, fuck me, we're quite trained, because I shot 3 before the fucking second group. That's how fast it was. So then the bloke came in, and then afterwards, we knew we had a weapons cache, or we thought IEDs had been planted, because I was watching the target myself. So I recorded everything, and I went and found what I saw on the screen, because I'm used to looking for stuff on the old Valons, and it was only after that, I was like, fucking hell. To be honest, the only way I can describe it, I was like a little kid. And I just, to pat me on the back and say, yeah, you're okay. And I looked at him. We saw him at breakfast, and he went, you all right? And I went, yeah, I'm all right, are you? And he went, yeah. He went, fucking good shooting, mate.
Yeah, job done, yeah.
And that was it. I was like, thank fuck for that. Yeah, so very.
But then, how does it come to play with your head years later?
Well, I did suffer nearer the last time when I was getting out. I think it's because you're starting to cut your ties then, with getting to Civilian Street. I did. If you spoke to my missus, she'd probably tell you more than I would. I was quite bad. But there was one.
Is that a feeling of guilt, or is it?
Only 2 incidents where it was innocence. But it was his family who were involved. But it was all investigated. Everything was done was spot on. It was just the fact that so basically, big Taliban commander. We were after him for ages. Every squadron was trying to get this bastard. We worked out there was probably about 5 blokes with the same code name. But anyway, he was moving across the border, bringing a lot of ammunition and a lot of explosives in. So he followed it, done that, got the clear, it fitted the criteria, so he dropped on it, and that was it. So to go and investigate, after we dropped it, rather than just leave it, it was such a big target we were after. A troop of us went out the helos and went in and patrolled, and straight away we were getting incoming as soon as we got off the helicopter. So we, quite hot, fought all the way up to where they were. Killed, I think, 5 on the way up there. They were all in the rivers and shit. Then as we were going around to clear it, fuck me, I think it opened up all our eyes. We ended up Kazivacking, and that's the picture I've got that stays in my mind the most. We ended up Kazivacking his family. 5 kids, 2 women, dead babies, because he was moving his family in amongst all that ammunition and stuff. He was getting them out. But when the big investigation teams come in, they looked at all the footage, and not at one stage did you ever see little people getting out of the vans and stuff like that. So it was already done before we set on the target, as in before we caught, as he was coming over the border. So he was bringing them in from Pakistan, basically, and that's where we picked him up.
Was he trying to use his family to shield the ammunition dump?
Yes, deep down, this is how I, not justify it, but how I come to terms with it. He knew what he was doing, and he risked. He put his own family at risk. Not fucking me. I didn't do that. I was there doing what we were doing, but I didn't expect. He knew he was putting his family. Any man worth his salt would not go, right, I'm probably getting followed all the time here. I'll stick them on with all the ammo. Maybe they won't attack it because there's kids on board. That is, and I'm telling you, that is how they think.
Yeah, that's the mentality you're up against.
So there's a couple of us involved in that because we were the first ones around the corner and there was nothing left, just a bit of fire. This is where the blanket thing, people covered in blankets, fucking, I swear, I was going senile. We were just going to pull off. I could hear screaming. I was like, lads, can you fucking hear that? Because our air defenders pick up every little whiz. They were like, nah, we've searched over there. I was like, nah, there's fucking something there. And then I found one of his daughters in a river with a blanket over her. So we knew there was one running away because we had feedback from the helos. There was a heat source running away. He basically just threw his daughter in the river and fucking threw a blanket over her. So, yeah, we saved, out of the kids, out of the 5 we took, I think 2 died through their injuries and the rest survived. Yeah, I think what gets me is because our drills we have when we go into situations like that, we haven't got time to lift blankets. We do 1, 2, carry on. 1, 2, carry on. We weren't expecting to see women and kids. And then when we did pull the blanket back and we saw what we saw, we were like that. Fuck's sake. I think for the whole squadron, that night alone affected everyone who was on that ground that night because of what we'd seen. It's just that I think when you're in and amongst it and you've got the blokes around you, it never gets talked about. It's just when you're on your own like I was just before I met you, you've got nothing else to think about.
Did the children get killed inadvertently by British guys going in because of where they were, because of where they'd been put?
Yeah. So not only we were shocked that there were survivors, there was nothing left of them vehicles, and yet we've got 5, 6 kids screaming like that. Where the fuck? How the fuck have they survived that? How? Because there was no vehicles left. Explosion, but these children were there. To my end, I was like, did someone just put these here or not? Because there was no vehicle left. There wasn't even a tyre left. And that's what we went to do, is to try and get evidence of what was being carried on there. So samples and stuff like that. Next minute, it turned out from going to do a search to Kazivacking 5, 6 kids, fucking 3 Ks away under a fire, Taliban. And it was only a small troop of us. It wasn't a full squadron. So we're going in and out to check, yeah? I've got that picture. I put it on the wall yet, but I've still got it. I could probably get a picture of it and you'd see what we were doing. I'm on it. You can make me out.
It is hard to emotionally process something like that, isn't it? I mean...
Yeah, maybe the bloke, he was on our team. He took over as our TL. That was his gift to the troop as a leaving present. It was a sketch. And I was like, fucking hell, mate. That was one of the ones we don't like talking about. And maybe that was his way of, we shouldn't forget about that one, or I don't know. But yeah, so that was the only one. The things where I get stressed is the bastards we knew who were so bad would last 3 or 4 days, the ones that got away basically, and they're still doing what they were doing. And that was, when we were doing so well and we'd have the fucking, it's wrong to say, but as a soldier it's easy for us. But up at government and fucking government level, it's a shower of shit. We know he's bad. There's the evidence. And yet you're still letting him go. We're just pissing in the wind. So all them lives we've lost and stuff like that now. And look at the state of it. They'll not get...
Something has got to happen in Afghan if they want to, but everyone is flapping because the Americans are going to cut their aid. Sorry, that's you, not me.
Something has got to... Well, not me, but the source. Something has got to happen in Afghan if they want to, but everybody is flapping because the Americans are going to cut their aid budget. You can hear in the UK, we're all on about how we use our aid, foreign aid, aid to help out, but my perspective on that, mate, is it was a job. We'd done it very well to the point where we nearly terminated the Taliban. The only ones left physically to fight and come over were all in Pakistan. We cleared, as far as I was concerned, we cleared the majority of the provinces. Now look at it.
Yeah, as you say, it's for naught, but it remains a military achievement, even if the legacy of it has been spoiled.
Yeah, and it has been spoiled. And you know what? They just can't leave it alone. It seems like we do something, we try and move on, and then they fucking try and drag us back down. But look at Iraq. Finally, them bastards have got their comeuppance. These solicitors and stuff who we're headhunting, and it's just, it all comes down to money. They don't give a shit. It all came down to, we can make some easy money here, and that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, it's been very interesting. When are you?
I trust. I've met you. I know you wouldn't see me off. Tuesday, so I'll be...
If you're in London, let me know, yeah?
Yeah, I will do, mate. We'll meet up.
We'll have some scoff.
I'll have to look for a couple of bits on them coppers for you.
Yeah, anything innocent. Obviously, think about the security aspect of it and not giving me anything.
I will do, mate. I know you wouldn't, mate.
No, it's the error that we don't anticipate. That's what we have to be aware of.
Something you think that's a bit too, yeah, go on. Okay, cool. Well, I'll have a look through it. I've not been through it for a couple of years. I try not to, but it'd be good to remember some of these bastards. All right, but I hope you understand what I was on about, but hopefully that's helped you a little bit.
Extremely, extremely. Super stuff.
Biggest thing there, mate. RMPs aren't fucking squeaky clean on this because they sit in on our briefs.
Yeah, that's a good, very powerful. It's very important that the public get told that come on, they know what is going on.
Exactly, mate. If there's anything else you need, just flash us an email. I'm always contactable on email. I'll help you wherever I can, all right?
Very kind, mate. Take care. Cheers.
Cheers, buddy. Have a good one. Bye.
Holy shit.
The holy shit, that was said by you after the source had hung up and you were no longer connected to each other.
Correct.
And do those two words sum up your emotion at the end of that 40-minute call following the admissions, confessions, revelations, or however you couch them, of the source?
Yes.
In the immediate aftermath of that call, did you struggle to process what you had been told by your source?
Well, I think looking at the article, it was coherent, so I must have got there in the end. But,
I'm sorry, it's an inelegant question by me, and I'll try it again. I don't mean did you struggle to convey his meaning in the article you wrote. I'm trying not to criticise people for the way they've done their work. Can I approach it this way, and this is what I meant? Having said holy shit, and you find yourself sat in your car, having just had a conversation with someone you believe to be a former member of the SAS who's confessed to killing people on the instructions of his team leader, who's spoken about dropped weapons, who's spoken about children being shot during the course of contact when they've been hiding under blankets. In terms of working through what you had just been told, that's what I meant by processing. The enormous information you've been given, both in terms of volume and in terms of content, if true, was that something that you struggled to process at that stage?
it wasn't easy. I had maybe 3 or 4 hours to play with. It's probably the most intense interview I've ever undertaken. So yeah, it was difficult.
As we know from the timings, you were able to provide enough information to back up the article you'd already written, and now we can see when we think back at it, I'm not going to take you through it, the quotations in your article which link back to the conversation you'd recorded with the source.
Yeah.
And again, going back to what I'd asked you when I first asked you about the article, leaving aside the need to translate some of what you were told into more readily comprehensible words, do you believe you did your very best to convey what it was you had been told by the source?
Yes, I very much hope so.
Insofar as there is discussion between you and him about meeting up when he is next in London, can I ask you this, please? Was there ever a discussion between you and him that he would be paid for the information he had given you?
No, none.
You had paid the intermediary for the information he'd provided and for other information he'd provided.
Well, I did subsequently pay the, if you get the
Yes.
tenses right.
But in respect of the source, why was he not paid for this very surprising piece of information he'd given you over the course of that 40-minute call?
Because in my mind, payment would have coloured what he told me.
At any stage, did he ever request any money either prior to talking to you and you refused it, or after talking to you and you refused it?
Never. It wasn't the purpose of his engagement with me.
Did he explain to you what the purpose of his engagement with you was?
That was discussed with the source. Sorry, that was discussed with the intermediary at length. And there's nothing specific. Looking at the transcript, there's nothing specific where I explain what my reasoning is, but I think it was explained to him that I wanted to contextualise what had been reported the previous Sunday, which had been less than impartial in its interpretation of events that had taken place. I wouldn't have used phrases like death squads, for example, to describe what the SES units involved, that sort of thing, because I believe he'd explained to me, as I'd wanted him to, the logic and the rationale behind what they were doing.
If we just look together very briefly to your paragraph 50 on page 13 for a moment, Mr. Nicol, and I'm conscious of the time, but can I indicate, if people can bear with me, I'm very nearly done, so rather than have a break now, unless everyone's waving a white flag, can we just continue for a few more moments? Thank you. You record on page 13 in your paragraph 50 that I believe the source was motivated to speak because he did not want the SAS to be hung out to dry. The Sunday Times article had portrayed them as callous war criminals, and I think the source wanted to defend the regiment and, by means of providing context, explain why actions which would appear heinous were considered appropriate by the SAS, particularly within the confines in which they were operating.
Yes, that was his view, and I shared that view.
But in the course of seeking to defend the regiment, if you have interpreted his words properly, he has told you that on the instructions of his team leader, he has killed someone.
Correct.
He's taken them back in on the pretense of conducting a search, that he has shot them dead, and that a claim has been made that that killing was justified because that person either had or had reached for a pistol.
Sadly, that appears to have been the case, yeah.
And he had also told you, in attempting to defend the regiment and providing context, that dropped weapons had been used to give the impression that somebody was armed, in order that when the Afghan police wanted to investigate it, they'd be able to link the body to a weapon, which would provide them with the sort of evidential link they'd want to tick that killing as justified.
Yes, but that's a conclusion they'd reached based on the difficulties facing them.
Can I just ask about the second article for a moment very quickly, and it's this. There's obviously not a similar recording in respect to the second article, and that article, as we know, is much shorter. Can I ask you this? In preparing to write the second article, did you speak to the source? And I'm looking, if it helps, to your paragraph 55 onwards on page 14. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you. In terms of any contact that you had with the source rather than any other people, prior to writing the article that you did in 2019, did you exchange any messages with the source to help flesh out that particular piece?
Yes, I made a request, and I distinctly remember him replying, I cannot discuss operations.
So you tried to reach out to him, but his reply to you was he couldn't discuss operations.
Correct.
So in terms of the information that was used to flesh out the article that you wrote in 2019, that information came from people other than the source.
Correct.
Over the course of the ensuing years, between the first article, the second, and now today, have you continued to carry out investigative journalism in this particular area?
Yes.
Have you come across anything that either casts doubt on or leads to a different interpretation being put upon what you were told by the source?
No, but to the best of my knowledge, this remains the only first-hand account by somebody who was involved. So there's nothing to compare it to. And the fact that it is the only account by someone who was involved, by a shooter, obviously makes it of significance. I might have liked something else to come along, so mine wasn't the only account that was out there, but that's it.
Mr. Nicol, I have nothing further for you, sir. Sir, do you have any questions for Mr. Nicol?
Indeed, just one. Mr. Nicol, you described the interview that you've very helpfully provided a transcript of as the most intense interview that you'd ever had. In your 25-year career, thereabouts, as a defence... It's not out, indeed. And if I may say so, a distinguished career as defence correspondent. Had you ever had a conversation quite like that?
Nothing like it. It was to hear such a graphic description of such incidents was remarkable.
To put it clearly and bluntly, the source was effectively confessing to you to murder.
I think so, but that's only my interpretation.
I'm so sorry, sir. Can I just ask one question, which I should have asked before, and I'm very sorry, Mr. Nicol, I didn't, but I've been very kindly reminded by others that I should have done, and it's this. Can I just take you back in your transcript of MN1 to what is red number 21 for the page at the bottom? So in divider 1, red number 21 at the bottom. If you look to the comment from the source in the middle of the page that begins, "Mate, we broke them, we broke them." Do you see that?
Yep.
And I'll allow everyone to catch up so that the relevant paragraph can appear on the screen for everyone to follow. Thank you very much indeed. If you look about halfway down the paragraph, from our perspective, we were doing these jobs, yes. We took the Afghans with us for the Afghan face, as you mentioned. That was before the NDS was established properly. That's the National Directorate of Security. Can I ask you this? What is it that was mentioned by for the Afghan face, as you mentioned?
I think that, well, I know that. I think that alludes to some of the more general discussions we were having before the tape started rolling, where I was talking about how often, or sometimes, it was written down that Afghans had led an operation when they hadn't.
I'm sorry to take you back to that, but thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Nicol, can I thank you very much indeed for coming to give your evidence and for all the work that has been put in by you and your team to check the evidence that you have given.
Thank you, Mark.
I want to make a few closing remarks, please. Over the last 2 days, evidence has been provided which has been graphic, and some of it may have caused upset. Such evidence is necessary and provided not to cause offence, but its vital detail to the inquiry, to enable the inquiry to investigate the serious allegations that have been made and that are part of my terms of reference. There are a significant number of organisations that offer support, and a list of some of those can be found on the inquiry's website on the support tab. I hope that it will be clearly understood after today and yesterday that individuals who have relevant information to give to the inquiry team, including those who are or were serving in UKSF will not be breaching the Official Secrets Act if they speak to the inquiry about the matters under investigation, and that a clear undertaking has been provided, having been sought by me, by the Attorney General to that very effect. I hope it is also abundantly clear to everyone that individuals can and should contact the inquiry directly and should do so as soon as possible, and that they can do so confidentially and indeed anonymously, and that the inquiry will treat the information provided with the utmost care and confidentiality. The only other news to impart is that the main gates to the Royal Courts of Justice are shut because of certain activities outside. So everybody should exit via the West Green entrance, which will be shown to you. Can I thank the staff in the Royal Courts of Justice, the shorthand writers, those who have done such a good job with the live feed on and off. All of that work is hugely appreciated. We'll now adjourn, and as I've indicated, the transcript of today and yesterday and various documents and so on will be put up on the inquiry website as soon as possible. Thank you very much indeed.